The first-class cabin of Flight BA-287 from London to New York buzzed with the usual pre-takeoff energy. Flight attendants moved swiftly through the aisles, checking seatbelts and stowing away last-minute items. Among the passengers was Robert Chen, a self-made tech millionaire who had built his fortune from scratch over the past 15 years. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had overcome numerous obstacles to reach the top. Robert settled into his window seat, placing his expensive leather briefcase under the seat in front of him. His normally busy mind was unusually calm today. After finalizing a major deal in London, he was looking forward to a few hours of uninterrupted rest before landing in New York for a well-deserved vacation. He had been working non-stop for months, barely taking weekends off, and his body craved rest. As he loosened his tie and took out his noise-canceling headphones, Robert glanced toward the aisle. That's when he saw her. Aisha Khan, his ex-wife. For a moment, Robert thought his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But there she was, as beautiful as the day they'd separated 12 years ago. Her dark hair was shorter now, with a few strands of silver that somehow made her look even more elegant. She was helping two children settle into their seats, 2 rows ahead of his. Robert's heart pounded against his chest. The last time he had seen Aisha was during their divorce proceedings. Their marriage had lasted barely 3 years, ending when his startup company began demanding more and more of his time. The split had been amicable but final. They had gone their separate ways without looking back, or so he had thought. "Sir, would you like something to drink before takeoff?" The flight attendant's voice brought Robert back to reality. "Just water, please," he replied, his mouth suddenly dry. His eyes remained fixed on Aisha, who hadn't noticed him yet. As the flight attendant moved away, Robert observed Aisha more carefully. She was traveling with 2 children, twins, it seemed. A boy and a girl, around 11 or 12 years old. Something about them made Robert's breath catch in his throat. The boy had the same sharp jawline that Robert saw every morning in the mirror. The girl had his distinctive eyebrows and the same way of wrinkling her nose when she laughed. They looked like him. Unmistakably like him. Robert's mind raced. 12 years since the divorce. The twins looked about 11. The timing, it couldn't be a coincidence. Had Aisha been pregnant when they separated? Had she kept this secret from him all these years? Or was his mind simply seeing connections that weren't there? The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and Robert remained frozen in his seat, unsure what to do. Should he approach her? What would he say after all these years? And what about the children? 20 minutes into the flight, Robert still hadn't moved from his seat. He had ordered a scotch, hoping it would calm his nerves, but the drink remained untouched. His eyes kept drifting toward Aisha and the twins, watching their interactions, catching glimpses of their faces whenever they turned. The boy was engrossed in a book about space exploration, the exact same subject that had fascinated Robert at that age. The girl was sketching something on a digital tablet, her face a mask of concentration that mirrored his own when he was working on complex coding problems. Robert's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant about the New York meetings, but for the first time in years, work was the furthest thing from his mind. He needed to know the truth. Taking a deep breath, Robert unfastened his seatbelt and stood up. The 7-hour flight to New York suddenly seemed both too long and too short for what he needed to do. He approached carefully, his heart hammering in his chest. Aisha was helping the girl with something on her tablet when she looked up and saw him. The recognition in her eyes was immediate, followed by something else, alarm, perhaps even fear. "Robert," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "Aisha," he replied, equally quiet. "It's been a long time." The twins looked up at him curiously, and Robert felt as though he was looking at younger versions of himself. The boy had his mother's complexion but Robert's eyes. The girl had Aisha's smile but Robert's determined chin. "Mom, who's this?" the girl asked, looking between Robert and her mother. Aisha hesitated, her eyes never leaving Robert's face. "This is an old friend," she finally said. "Robert, these are my children, Zara and Ryan." Robert's legs felt weak. He wanted to ask the question burning in his mind, but not in front of the children. "Could we talk for a moment?" he asked Aisha. She nodded, asked the twins to stay put, and followed Robert to the small area near the galley where passengers sometimes stretched their legs during long flights. "They're mine, aren't they?" Robert asked without preamble, his voice a mixture of hurt and wonder. Aisha looked down, then back at him with tears in her eyes. "Yes," she admitted. "I found out I was pregnant a week after our divorce was finalized." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than he intended, laced with 12 years of lost fatherhood. "You were just getting your company off the ground," Aisha explained. "You were working 20-hour days, traveling constantly. Our marriage couldn't survive your schedule, how could parenting?" She wiped a tear from her cheek. "I tried to call you several times during the first month, but you never picked up. Then I saw your interview in Tech Weekly where you said you were relieved to be free of distractions. That was us, Robert. We were the distractions." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He remembered that interview. He had been exhausted, running on caffeine and ambition, saying whatever he thought would make him sound like a dedicated entrepreneur. "I never meant." He began, but Aisha shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you meant. I made the decision I thought was best for our children. I moved back home to my parents in Manchester, raised them with their help. We've had a good life." Robert leaned against the wall, trying to process everything. "Do they know about me?" "They know their father was a businessman who wasn't ready for a family," Aisha said. "I never spoke badly of you. I told them that someday, when they were older, would tell them more." "And now?" Robert asked. "What happens now?" Aisha glanced back toward their seats, where Zara and Ryan were watching them curiously. "That depends on you. We're moving to New York. I've accepted a position at Columbia University, teaching international relations." Robert felt as though the universe was giving him a second chance he never knew he needed. "I want to know them," he said firmly. "If they want to know me." Aisha studied his face for a long moment. "Are you sure? Children aren't like business deals, Robert. You can't invest when it's convenient and pull out when it's not. They would need stability, commitment." "I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago," Robert said. "Yes, I've built my company, but lately I've been feeling like something important was missing from my life. Now I know what it was." The skepticism in Aisha's eyes was well earned. She had seen him choose work over their relationship too many times. "Just give me a chance," he pleaded. "Let me meet them properly, as their father. We can take it slowly." Before Aisha could respond, Ryan appeared beside them. "Mom, Zara wants to know if we can have the cookies now," he said, before turning his curious gaze to Robert. Looking at his son up close, Robert could see even more similarities: the way he stood with his weight shifted slightly to one side, the thoughtful expression that Robert's own mother had always commented on. "In a minute, sweetheart," Aisha said, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Ryan continued to stare at Robert. "You look like someone," the boy said suddenly. "Oh?" Robert tried to keep his voice casual. "Yeah, like that guy on the cover of Business Today last month. Mom cut out the article for her vision board." Robert glanced at Aisha, who blushed slightly. "You follow my career?" he asked her quietly. "I thought they should know about your accomplishments, even if they didn't know you were their father," she admitted. "The article said you'd revolutionized clean water technology in developing countries. That's something to be proud of." Robert felt a surge of emotion. While he had been completely unaware of their existence, Aisha had made sure their children knew the good he had done in the world. "We should get back to our seats," Aisha said, guiding Ryan back to where Zara was waiting. Robert followed, hesitating as they reached their row. "Would it be all right if I sat with you for a while? Just to talk?" Aisha looked at the twins, then back at Robert. "I suppose that would be okay." For the next hour, Robert sat in the aisle seat next to Ryan, engaging in careful conversation. He asked about their interests, their school, their hobbies. He discovered that Ryan loved astronomy and robotics, while Zara was passionate about art and mathematics, a combination that made Robert smile, recognizing his own diverse interests. The twins were bright, articulate, and curious, eager to know about Robert's work and life. He told them about his company's projects, carefully editing out the parts about grueling work schedules and sacrificed relationships. "So you make apps that help people get clean water?" Zara asked, leaning across her brother to see Robert better. "Among other things," Robert explained. "My company develops technology that makes it easier and cheaper to purify water in places where clean water is hard to find." "That's actually cool," Ryan said, sounding genuinely impressed. "At school, we did a project on global water scarcity." As the conversation flowed, Robert occasionally caught Aisha watching them, her expression a mixture of caution and something softer, perhaps hope. He was careful not to overstep, not to make promises he couldn't keep, but with each passing minute, his resolve strengthened. He wanted to be part of their lives. He needed to be. When the flight attendant announced lunch service, Robert reluctantly returned to his own seat, but not before exchanging phone numbers with Aisha. "May I call you when we land?" he asked quietly. "Perhaps we could meet tomorrow, continue this conversation?" Aisha nodded. "We're staying at the Marriott in Midtown until our apartment is ready next week. I know a good Italian restaurant nearby," Robert said. "Kid-friendly. No pressure, just dinner and conversation." For the first time, Aisha smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart 17 years ago when they'd met as graduate students. "We'd like that," she said. As Robert returned to his seat, his mind was no longer on the business deals waiting for him in New York. Instead, he was thinking about what truly mattered, the family he never knew he had, and the second chance he never expected to get. The remainder of the flight passed in a blur of emotions and plans, as Robert Chen, tech millionaire, prepared for his most important venture yet, becoming a father to the children who looked just like him. The plane touched down at JFK Airport with a gentle bump. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Robert remained seated, watching Aisha help the twins organize their backpacks. His mind was still reeling from the discovery. He had children, two brilliant, beautiful children who had been growing up without him for 11 years. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Robert stood and retrieved his briefcase from beneath the seat. His original plan had been to head straight to his penthouse apartment in Manhattan, maybe review some documents before sleeping off his jet lag. Now, those plans seemed trivial, disconnected from what truly mattered. He waited patiently as other passengers filed out of the plane. Aisha and the twins were a few people ahead of him in the aisle. Zara turned around, spotted him, and gave a small wave. The simple gesture made Robert's heart swell. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of excitement that both thrilled and terrified him. What if he couldn't live up to their expectations? "Absolutely," he replied with a smile he hoped conveyed confidence rather than the nervousness bubbling inside him. As they separated at immigration, Robert in the U.S. citizens line, Aisha and the twins in the visitors' queue, he felt a strange emptiness, as if they were being torn away from him all over again. He moved through customs quickly, his trusted traveler status expediting the process, and waited in the arrivals hall, hoping to catch one more glimpse of them before they went their separate ways. 20 minutes later, he spotted them coming through the doors, Ryan pulling a large suitcase while Zara and Aisha handled smaller bags. Without thinking, Robert approached them. Let me help you with those, he offered, reaching for the heaviest luggage. Oh, you didn't have to wait, Aisha said, looking surprised. I wanted to make sure you got through okay, Robert explained. First time in New York? He asked the twins. We came once when we were little, Ryan answered. But I don't really remember it. I remember the big park, Zara added. The one with the rocks you can climb. Central Park, Robert nodded. It's not far from where you're staying. Maybe we could visit there sometime during your first week. The hope in their eyes was unmistakable, and Robert silently vowed not to disappoint them. We should get a taxi, Aisha said, glancing at her watch. It's getting late. My driver is waiting outside, Robert said hesitantly. I could give you a ride to your hotel, if you'd like. Aisha looked uncertain, but Ryan's eyes lit up. Do you have a limo? He asked eagerly. Robert laughed. Just an SUV, I'm afraid. But it's comfortable. Can we, Mom? Zara joined in, her previous shyness apparently forgotten in the excitement of the moment. After a brief hesitation, Aisha nodded. That would be very kind, thank you. As they walked toward the exit, Robert texted his driver, Wei, to bring the car around. The evening air was warm with the promise of summer, the sky darkening into dusk over the airport. There he is, Robert pointed as a black Escalade pulled up to the curb. Wei, his driver of 5 years, hopped out to help with the luggage. Good evening, Mr. Chen, Wei greeted him, then nodded politely to Aisha and the twins. Wei, this is Aisha, Zara, and Ryan, Robert introduced them. We're giving them a ride to the Marriott in Midtown. If Wei was surprised by his boss's unexpected companions, he didn't show it. He efficiently loaded their luggage into the trunk while Robert held the door open for Aisha and the twins. Inside the spacious vehicle, Zara and Ryan couldn't contain their excitement, examining every feature from the plush leather seats to the built-in tablet screens. This is awesome, Ryan declared, running his fingers over the controls for the climate system. Robert watched them with a mixture of pride and regret. He had missed so many firsts in their lives. First steps, first words, first days of school. Now, he was witnessing their first time in a luxury vehicle, and their joy was infectious. As Wei navigated through the evening traffic toward Manhattan, Robert found himself studying Aisha's profile in the dim light. She looked tired but content, occasionally smiling at something one of the twins said or did. The years had been kind to her, she was still as beautiful as he remembered, perhaps even more so now with the quiet dignity of motherhood. So, Columbia University, Robert said quietly while the twins were distracted by the passing scenery. That's impressive. It's a good opportunity, Aisha replied. They have an excellent international relations department, and the position comes with housing assistance, which helps in New York. How long will you be here? Robert asked, trying to sound casual despite the importance of her answer. It's a 3-year contract initially, with the possibility of tenure track after that, she explained. 3 years. The knowledge settled in Robert's chest like a weight and a promise all at once. 3 years to get to know his children, to make up for lost time, to become the father they deserved. I'm glad, he said simply. The conversation paused as they entered the Midtown Tunnel, the overhead lights casting rhythmic shadows across their faces. When they emerged into the glittering forest of Manhattan skyscrapers, the twins pressed their faces against the windows in awe. Look at all the lights! Zara exclaimed. It's like stars but on buildings. That's the Empire State Building, Robert pointed out as they passed the iconic structure. And over there is the Chrysler Building. Tomorrow I can show you where I work. My office has a view of the whole city. Do you have a corner office? Ryan asked. Like in the movies? Robert nodded. Top floor, northeast corner. You can see all the way to Brooklyn on clear days. Cool, Ryan breathed, clearly impressed. When they arrived at the Marriott, Wei unloaded the luggage while Robert walked Aisha and the twins to the entrance. "Thank you for the ride," Aisha said, her voice formal but not cold. "It was my pleasure," Robert assured her. "So, dinner tomorrow? I could pick you up around 6. Aisha nodded. "That should work. We'll be settling in during the day, unpacking and getting our bearings." "I could help with that," Robert offered, then quickly added, "or I could give you space. Whatever you prefer." Aisha seemed to consider this. "Why don't you come by around noon? We could have lunch, and then maybe show the twins a bit of the city." The suggestion, so casual, so familial, caught Robert off guard. "I'd like that very much," he said, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. The twins, who had been examining the hotel's ornate entrance, turned back to say goodbye. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Chen," Ryan said, extending his hand with surprising formality. Robert shook it, fighting the urge to pull the boy into a hug. "Please, call me Robert," he said, though what he wanted to say was, "Dad." Zara was less reserved. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Robert's waist in a quick, impulsive hug. "Thanks for the ride," she said. "And for telling us about your company. I told Mom I want to be an engineer someday." Robert gently returned the hug, meeting Aisha's eyes over Zara's head. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, of the bond that was already forming between Robert and the children. "You'll make an excellent engineer," Robert told Zara sincerely. "I should know. I've hired hundreds of them." With final goodbyes and promises to see each other the next day, Robert watched as Aisha and the twins disappeared into the hotel lobby. He stood there for a long moment, reluctant to break the connection by leaving. "Back to your apartment, sir?" Wei asked, standing by the open car door. "Yes," Robert replied, finally turning away from the hotel entrance. "But first, let's make a stop." 30 minutes later, Robert entered his spacious Tribeca penthouse, his arms full of shopping bags. He had stopped at a 24-hour department store and purchased everything he thought might make his home more welcoming to children: video games, board games, art supplies, snacks that kids might like. The purchases had been impulsive, perhaps even excessive, but Robert couldn't help himself. He wanted to be prepared if, when, Zara and Ryan visited his home. Setting the bags down in his minimalist living room, Robert looked around with fresh eyes. The space, designed by a high-end decorator, was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city. But it was also cold, impersonal, a place to sleep and work, not a home. For the first time, Robert saw his life as it truly was, successful but hollow, filled with achievements but devoid of the connections that mattered most. He opened his laptop and began searching for information about parenting preteens, about custody arrangements, about how to build relationships with children you hadn't raised. The lawyer in him knew that there would be legal complexities to navigate if he wanted formal recognition as their father. The businessman in him understood that this would require negotiation and compromise. But the part of him that had felt an immediate, powerful connection to Zara and Ryan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were worth facing. At 3 a.m, exhausted but too wired to sleep, Robert stood at his window, gazing at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a hotel room, his children were sleeping. His children. The thought was still overwhelming, still difficult to fully comprehend. His phone chirped with a text message. It was from Aisha. "They haven't stopped talking about you. Ryan looked up your company online and is now explaining clean water technology to Zara, who's designing an improved filtration system on her tablet. They're excited about tomorrow. So am I." Robert read the message 3 times, a lump forming in his throat. He typed back. "I can't wait to see all of you. Thank you, Aisha, for being willing to let me into their lives after everything. I promise I won't let any of you down. After sending the text, Robert finally felt calm enough to sleep. As he drifted off, his mind was filled not with business plans or investment strategies, but with visions of a future that included weekend trips to museums, helping with homework, celebrating birthdays and holidays, all the moments of parenthood he had missed and now had a chance to experience. Tomorrow would be the first day of that new life, and Robert Chen, tech millionaire and newly discovered father, couldn't remember ever feeling so nervous or so hopeful. Robert woke before his alarm, his mind immediately alert despite only a few hours of sleep. Sunlight streamed through the windows of his penthouse, illuminating the shopping bags he'd left scattered across the living room floor. He checked his phone and found another message from Aisha sent just minutes ago. The twins are up early. Jet lag and excitement. Wondering if we could meet earlier? They're asking about breakfast with you. His heart leapt at the words. They wanted to see him. Robert quickly typed back. I'm available anytime. There's a great breakfast place 2 blocks from your hotel. I could be there in 30 minutes. Aisha's response came almost immediately, perfect. See you soon. Robert showered and dressed in record time, opting for casual clothes instead of his usual suit and tie. He chose dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt, approachable, he hoped, rather than intimidating. As he headed out, he grabbed one of the smaller packages he'd purchased the night before, a set of New York-themed sketchbooks and professional drawing pencils for Zara. The morning air was crisp and energizing as Robert walked from the subway station to the hotel. He could have taken his car, but the subway was faster during morning rush hour, and he found himself too impatient to sit in traffic. Every minute away from the twins now felt like a minute wasted. He spotted them in the hotel lobby, Ryan in animated conversation with Aisha, Zara braiding a small section of her dark hair as she listened. The sight of them, his family, sent a wave of emotion through Robert that he wasn't prepared for. These were his children, his blood, parts of himself that had been living and growing in the world without him knowing. Robert. Zara noticed him first, waving enthusiastically. He approached them with a smile he couldn't have suppressed if he tried. Good morning. Sleep well? The beds are so bouncy, Ryan declared. And there's a TV in the bathroom mirror. Fancy hotel, Robert acknowledged with a laugh. Ready for breakfast? There's a place nearby that makes incredible pancakes. With blueberries? Zara asked hopefully. With anything you want, Robert promised. He turned to Aisha, who was watching the interaction with a guarded expression. How about you? Did you sleep well? On and off, she admitted. It's been an eventful 24 hours. That's an understatement, Robert agreed quietly. The breakfast place was only a short walk away, a cozy family-owned restaurant that Robert had discovered years ago. Despite his wealth, he preferred its unpretentious atmosphere to the sterile elegance of hotel restaurants. Mr. Chen. Long time no see, called the owner, Mrs. Patel, as they entered. And you brought guests today. Special occasion? Very special, Robert confirmed. Mrs. Patel, this is Aisha, Zara, and Ryan. Welcome, welcome, Mrs. Patel beamed. Best table for you, by the window. As they settled into their seats, Robert watched the twins taking in the restaurant's cheerful decor, colorful artwork on the walls, fresh flowers on every table, shelves lined with books that customers could borrow while they ate. I like this place, Zara declared, picking up the menu with interest. Me too, Robert said. I've been coming here for years. What he didn't say was that he often came alone, finding comfort in the restaurant's warmth when his apartment felt too empty, too quiet. After they ordered, blueberry pancakes for Zara, chocolate chip waffles for Ryan, omelets for Aisha and Robert, there was a moment of awkward silence. Where did one begin, after 12 years of separation and secrets? I have something for you, Robert said to Zara, placing the wrapped package on the table. Just a small welcome to New York gift. Zara looked surprised but pleased. Can I open it now? Of course, Robert nodded. She carefully unwrapped the package, revealing the sketchbooks and drawing pencils. Her eyes widened. These are professional grade, she said, running her fingers over the pencils reverently. The art supply store clerk recommended them, Robert explained. I thought you might like to sketch some of the sights while you're here. Thank you, Zara said sincerely, already opening one of the sketchbooks. Robert turned to Ryan. I have something for you too, but it's back at my apartment. A telescope. Not a professional one, but good enough to see some planets and stars, even with city lights. Really? Ryan's face lit up. Can we set it up today? If your mother agrees, Robert replied, looking to Aisha. She hesitated only briefly. I suppose we could visit your place this afternoon, after seeing a bit of the city. The food arrived, momentarily distracting everyone. As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally. Robert asked about their life in Manchester, and the twins eagerly told him about their school, their friends, their hobbies. Ryan was on the chess team and had recently won a regional science fair with a project on alternative energy sources. Zara played violin and had exhibited her artwork in a student gallery. You've done an amazing job with them, Robert told Aisha quietly while the twins were distracted by Mrs. Patel, who had brought them complimentary cookies. They make it easy, Aisha replied. They're good kids. Smart, kind. She paused, then added, they have a lot of your qualities, you know. Ryan has your focus, your ability to get lost in a project for hours. And Zara has your creativity, your way of seeing problems from unusual angles. The observation touched Robert deeply. I wish I had been there to see those traits develop, he said, regret coloring his voice. We can't change the past, Aisha said softly. But the future is still unwritten. After breakfast, they spent the morning exploring Midtown. Robert showed them his office building, a gleaming glass tower on Madison Avenue, but didn't suggest going inside. That could wait for another day. Instead, they visited Grand Central Terminal, where the twins marveled at the celestial ceiling, and Bryant Park, where they watched chess players engaged in lightning-fast matches. Do you play? One of the chess veterans asked Ryan, noticing his intense interest. Yes, sir, Ryan replied. I'm on my school team. Want to try a game? The man offered, gesturing to his board. Ryan looked at Robert and Aisha for permission. Go ahead, Robert encouraged him. Just one game, though. We have more to see today. As Ryan settled in for his match, Zara pulled out her new sketchbook and began drawing the park scene. Robert and Aisha sat on a nearby bench, watching their children with shared pride. He's good, Robert commented as Ryan made a particularly clever move. He gets that from you, Aisha said. You were always unbeatable at chess. Not always, Robert reminded her with a small smile. You beat me once, remember? 2 weeks after we met. I was so impressed I asked you out for coffee right then. I remember, Aisha nodded. You looked so shocked when I checkmated you. They fell silent, both remembering the beginning of their relationship, the coffee dates that turned into dinner dates, the long walks through London parks, the intellectual challenges they posed to each other. They had been good together, once, before Robert's ambition had consumed him. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. For how things ended between us. I was so focused on building something lasting that I destroyed the most important thing I had. Aisha looked at him thoughtfully. We were both young, both finding our paths. I don't blame you anymore, Robert. I did for a while, but that faded long ago. Why didn't you try to contact me again? After the twins were born? The question had been burning inside him since yesterday. Aisha sighed. Pride, at first. Then concern for the twins. I didn't want them to know a father who might drift in and out of their lives when his schedule allowed. And later, it just seemed too complicated, too difficult to explain why I had waited so long. Before Robert could respond, they were interrupted by Ryan's triumphant return. "I won," he announced, beaming. "Mr. Tomas said I have natural talent." "Well done," Robert praised him, feeling a surge of paternal pride that was entirely new and wonderfully overwhelming. They continued their exploration of the city, stopping for hot dogs from a street vendor for lunch, then visiting the New York Public Library, where Zara and Ryan were awestruck by the majestic reading room. "Can we get library cards?" Ryan asked eagerly. "Once we're settled in our apartment," Aisha promised. "We'll be living just a few blocks from here." As the afternoon progressed, Robert noticed the twins beginning to flag, jet lag catching up with them despite their enthusiasm. "Should we head to my place?" he suggested. "It's not far, and you could all rest a bit before dinner." Aisha agreed, and they caught a taxi to Robert's Tribeca penthouse. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Robert felt a strange nervousness. His home had always been his private retreat, a space designed for his comfort alone. Now he was seeing it through the eyes of his children, wondering if they would find it cold or unwelcoming. He needn't have worried. The moment they entered, Zara and Ryan's exhaustion seemed to vanish as they explored the spacious apartment with undisguised amazement. "You live here alone?" Ryan asked, pressing his face against the floor-to-ceiling windows to take in the panoramic view of the city. "I do," Robert confirmed, watching as Zara discovered the shopping bags he'd left in the living room. "What's all this?" she asked, peering inside one. "Just some things I thought you might enjoy when you visit," Robert explained, trying to sound casual. "Board games, video games, art supplies, snacks. You got all this for us?" Ryan looked stunned. "Yesterday?" "After I dropped you at the hotel," Robert nodded. "I wanted you to feel comfortable here." Aisha, who had been quiet since they arrived, touched his arm lightly. "That was thoughtful of you," she said softly. "It was the least I could do," Robert replied. "There's something else I want to show you both," he added to the twins. "In the spare bedroom." He led them down the hallway and opened the door to what had once been his home office. He had stayed up late rearranging it, moving his desk to one side and setting up two comfortable futons on the other. "I thought maybe, if you ever wanted to stay over, you could use this room," he explained, suddenly uncertain. "We could make it more personal over time, with your input on colors and furniture." He trailed off as Zara threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Ryan was examining the telescope Robert had set up by the window. "Can we use this tonight?" he asked eagerly. "Absolutely," Robert promised. "The view from here is pretty good, despite the city lights." As the twins continued exploring the room, Robert turned to find Aisha watching him with an unreadable expression. "Too much?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, it's perfect." "You're really serious about this, aren't you? About being in their lives?" "More serious than I've ever been about anything," Robert assured her. "I know I have a lot to prove, to you and to them. But I'm ready to do the work, Aisha. However long it takes." For the first time since their reunion, Aisha smiled at him without reservation, without caution. "Then let's take it one day at a time," she said, "starting with tonight." And as the afternoon sun bathed the room in golden light, Robert knew that no business deal, no technological breakthrough, no financial success could ever compare to the treasure he had discovered at 30,000 feet, somewhere between London and New York, a family he hadn't known he had, and a second chance he was determined not to waste. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Robert reorganized his entire schedule, delegating meetings and projects to his management team to free up as much time as possible with Zara and Ryan. His employees were surprised by the sudden change in their normally work-focused boss, but Robert offered no explanations beyond mentioning important family matters. Aisha and the twins moved into their university-provided apartment near Columbia's campus, a spacious 3-bedroom with large windows and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Robert helped with the move, carrying boxes and assembling furniture alongside the professional movers he had insisted on hiring. "You don't have to do all this," Aisha told him as he struggled to put together Zara's desk, consulting the instruction manual with the same intense concentration he usually reserved for company financial reports. "I want to," Robert replied simply. And it was true. Each mundane domestic task felt like a precious opportunity to make up for lost time, to be the father and co-parent he should have been all along. The twins adapted to Robert's presence in their lives with the remarkable resilience of children. They seemed to accept, without question, that this successful businessman who had suddenly appeared on a plane was their father and would now be a permanent fixture in their lives. Robert marveled at their capacity for forgiveness, for openness, qualities he wasn't sure he would have possessed in their position. As July turned to August, they fell into a comfortable routine. Robert would visit the apartment several evenings a week, bringing dinner or cooking with ingredients he'd purchased from local markets. On weekends, they explored the city together, visiting museums, taking boat rides around Manhattan, picnicking in Central Park. Robert discovered that parenting was both more challenging and more rewarding than he had imagined. There were moments of frustration, like when Ryan became sullen after losing a video game, or when Zara insisted on wearing the same paint-stained t-shirt 3 days in a row, but these were far outweighed by moments of connection and joy. One evening, as they sat around the dining table in Aisha's apartment finishing a meal of homemade pasta, Ryan suddenly asked the question Robert had been both expecting and dreading. "Why weren't you there when we were growing up?" he asked, his young face serious. "Did you not want to be our dad?" The room fell silent. Zara looked up from her plate, equally curious about the answer. Aisha watched Robert carefully, offering neither assistance nor interference. Robert set down his fork and took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind many times over the past weeks, but now that the moment had arrived, all his prepared responses felt inadequate. "I didn't know about you," he said finally, deciding that simple honesty was the only approach. "And that wasn't your mother's fault," he added quickly. "It was mine. When your mother and I separated, I was so focused on building my company that I made myself impossible to reach. I missed the chance to know that you both existed. But didn't you ever wonder?" Zara asked. "If Mom might have had babies?" The innocent question pierced Robert's heart. "I should have," he acknowledged. "That's one of my biggest regrets. I was selfish and short-sighted. I thought success meant having money and recognition, but I was wrong. Real success is having people you love and who love you back." Ryan considered this. "So you would have been with us if you'd known?" "Without a doubt," Robert assured him. "The minute I saw you both on that plane, I knew that being your father was the most important job I would ever have." "More important than being CEO?" Ryan pressed, clearly having researched Robert's company. "Infinitely more important," Robert confirmed. "In fact." He hesitated, looking at Aisha before continuing. "I've been thinking about stepping back from my CEO role. Becoming chairman instead, which would give me more flexibility, more time with both of you." Aisha looked surprised. "Robert, that's a major decision." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied. "I've already discussed it with the board. They're supportive, especially since I'm not leaving entirely. I've been grooming my COO, Lynn, for years. She's more than ready to take over day-to-day operations." The twins seemed satisfied with this explanation, and the conversation moved on to plans for the following weekend. Later, after the twins had gone to bed, Robert and Aisha sat on the small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine under the muted stars of the New York night sky. "You're really stepping down as CEO?" Aisha asked, still sounding disbelieving. Scaling back, Robert clarified. Not disappearing. The company will be fine without my micromanagement. And the twins need me more than Clearwater Tech does right now. Aisha looked at him thoughtfully. You've changed, she observed. For the better, I hope, Robert smiled. Definitely for the better, she confirmed. The Robert the first knew 12 years ago wouldn't have considered stepping away from the company he built, not for anything. The Robert you knew 12 years ago was a fool, he said quietly. Too blinded by ambition to see what really mattered. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the city lights. Robert was acutely aware of Aisha's presence beside him, of the familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, the same one she had worn when they were married. Over the past weeks, as they had navigated co-parenting and re-established trust, he had felt the old attraction returning. But he had been careful not to push, not to presume. What about you? He asked eventually. Are you happy here, with your position at Columbia? Very, Aisha nodded. The department is wonderful, the students are engaged, and New York has so much to offer the twins. It's different from Manchester, of course, but change can be good. And? Robert hesitated, then decided to ask the question that had been on his mind. Is there someone special in your life? Someone I should know about, as a co-parent? Aisha smiled slightly. No. There have been relationships over the years, but nothing that stuck. Being a single mother to twins doesn't leave much room for serious romance. And I've been picky, anyone in their lives needed to be a positive influence. Robert nodded, feeling a complicated mix of emotions, relief that there was no one else in the picture, guilt that Aisha had shouldered the parenting burden alone, hope for possibilities he wasn't quite ready to articulate. What about you? Aisha returned the question. The business magazines often have you on most eligible bachelor lists. Surely there have been women in your life? Dates and short relationships, Robert admitted. Nothing meaningful. I've always used work as an excuse, but the truth is, no one ever compared to what we had. He looked at her directly. I never stopped loving you, Aisha. Even when I was too busy and blind to show it properly. Aisha looked away, out at the city skyline. That was a lifetime ago, Robert. We're different people now. I know, he acknowledged. I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted you to know that what we had was important to me, even if I didn't act like it then. Before Aisha could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Mom? I had a bad dream. They turned to see Zara standing there in her pajamas, looking small and vulnerable. Aisha immediately went to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. Want to talk about it? Zara shook her head. Can I have some water? Of course, sweetheart. Aisha led her back inside. Robert followed, watching as Aisha got a glass of water for their daughter, speaking to her in soothing tones. The simple domestic scene, a mother comforting a child after a nightmare, struck him with its poignancy. These were the moments he had missed, thousands of them, strung together to form the tapestry of family life. Would you like me to tell you a story? He heard himself offering. My mother used to tell me stories when I had bad dreams. It helped. Zara looked at him with interest. What kind of stories? All kinds, Robert smiled. But my favorites were about a little girl who could talk to birds. They would tell her secrets about the world that no one else knew. I'd like to hear that one, Zara decided, taking her water and heading back toward her bedroom. Robert looked questioningly at Aisha, who nodded her permission. He followed Zara into her room, now decorated with her artwork and family photos, including a recent one of all four of them at the Bronx Zoo. Zara climbed back into bed, and Robert sat in the chair beside it, launching into the story his mother had told him so many years ago. As he spoke, weaving the tale of a girl named Jean who befriended a wise old crow, He watched Zara's eyelids grow heavy. By the time he finished the story, she was fast asleep. Robert gently adjusted her blanket and stood to leave, finding Aisha watching from the doorway. "You're good at that," she whispered as they stepped into the hallway. "My mother would be pleased to know her stories live on," Robert replied softly. "She always said storytelling was in our family's blood." "The twins should know their grandmother's stories," Aisha said. "They should know their grandmother, period." "Your parents, are they still in Taiwan?" Robert nodded. "Still in the same house in Taipei. They've never met their grandchildren." The realization hit him with fresh force. "I need to change that. We should plan a trip," Aisha suggested. "When the twins have a school break. Your parents would love them."